This is a reading of Written in Bone, Buried Lives in Jamestown by Sally Walker, Part 2. This is Chapter 2. He or she. The picture on page 31 has 3 parts. The first part is, let's read. It's called Differences in the Shapes of Certain Bones Help Forensic Anthropologists Determine Gender. A notch called a sciatic notch is wider in a female's pelvic bone that you see on the left. Certain areas of the male skull are more prominent than corresponding areas on a female skull. That's in the picture on the left at the bottom. A male's long bones, such as the upper arm bone, are usually larger and more robust than a female's on the bottom right. These kinds of differences enabled Owlsley to determine that JR 1225B was a male. All right, let's read the text. After determining the age of a skeleton at the time of death, the next question the forensic anthropologist tries to answer is whether the person was male or female. In the case of early Jamestown, the historical record tells us that all English colonists who arrived in 1607 were male, but a number of women arrived the following year. Since JR 1225B could have been buried at any point within the 20 years James Fort was used, the remains could have been either sex. In adult-sized skeletons, an individual sex is determined based on variations in the pelvis. An adult female's pelvis is shaped differently from a male's, allowing room for an infant to pass between a mother's pelvic bones during childbirth. Also, the hip bones, which are part of the pelvis, are shaped differently in women than in men. Although JR 1225B wasn't an adult, the features of the skeleton's pelvis were distinctly male. Other skeletal evidence provided further support for this theory. A male's long bones are usually larger and more robust than a female's of a similar age. Men often have larger teeth than women too. JR 1225B's remains met these criteria. Perhaps most conclusive were features Owlsley found on the skeleton. The back of a man's skull, where a muscle is attached during life, has a larger ridge than a female skull. Males also have more prominent brow ridge, the bony part of the skull above the eyes, than females. The chin tends to be more squared in males, while a female's chin is rounded, with the center of the chin tending to come to a point. The ridge at the back of the Jamestown teen skull is a slightly heavier brow ridge, and a square chin were characteristic of a male skull. This evidence, along with that of other bones, made Owlsley feel confident in asserting that JR 1225B was a male. Okay, we're going to look at the picture on page 33. It says comparing skull features of 3 distinct Chesapeake groups. In the brown, it says African, rounded forehead, wide nasal opening, slight overbite, front of jaw forward of chin. In the green, European, narrow face, narrow nasal opening, slight overbite, front of jaw aligned with chin. In the blue, Native American, flat face, no overbite, cheekbones project farther forward. Okay, where did you come from? Another step in unraveling the mystery is a set of human remains is to try to determine the individual's ancestry. All organisms, including humans, adapt to their environment in ways that make their survival easier. Parents pass along these adaptations. including physical traits and characteristics such as skin color or hair texture to their offspring. While each person is unique, over many generations, some traits may start to occur in recognizable patterns. In the modern world, people from many geographical areas travel far and wide, building new cultures and starting families, sometimes with people whose ancestry differs from their own. In colonial Chesapeake region, though, people came from three distinct ancestries: African, European, and Native American. Certain features of a person's skull can provide clues about which population a skeleton may have belonged to. This information can be critically important to help us understand how people lived in the past. That said, forensic anthropologists always keep in mind that each person is an individual. A given population may include many variations in bone features, and circumstances such as diet and disease may also affect the appearance of bones. Thus, it is important not to rush to conclusions about any individual's ancestry. When Olsky began his study of JR 1225B skull, he looked for specific characteristics in the nose, cheeks, and jaw. For example, many, though not all, people from Africa and their descendants tend to have a wide nasal opening and a rounded forehead. The front of the jaw often protrudes further forward than the chin. Europeans and their descendants usually have a narrow nasal opening and a narrow face. The front of the jaw is usually in line with the chin. Native Americans and their descendants generally have a flatter face than either of the other two groups, with cheekbones that project farther forward. The front teeth of Africans and Europeans usually close together with an overbite, meaning that the upper teeth are slightly in front of the lower teeth. People of Native American ancestry don't tend to have an overbite. When the mouth is closed, the upper and lower teeth usually meet edge to edge. Even slight differences in the shape of the bones that form the roof of the mouth can identify whether colonial period remains are African, European, or Native American. Ultimately, it's a combination of observation, lab testing, and precise measurement that enables forensic anthropologists to decide upon the most likely ancestry of a particular set of remains. Even without all these tools, however, Ousley could see that JR 1225B's skull features the narrow nasal opening, the narrow face, and the shape of the bones of the roof of the mouth were likely those of English people of the 17th century. Using these criteria, Ousley determined that the teenage boy buried inside James Fort was European. Ousley concluded his initial examination of JR 1225B by asking Hudgens and Schmidt to measure the full skeleton and the long bones of the legs. We measure bones in situ for many reasons. At Jamestown, I've got to measure in place, or I'm not going to get the measurements of the whole bone, Ousley explained. Poorly preserved bones, which are common at Jamestown due to the clay subsoil, often crumble as they are removed from the grave. The fragments may be reassembled in the laboratory, but they won't look exactly replicate of their appearance and size in the grave. Next, Ousley took a close look at the arrowhead Hudgens had spotted. It could have remained so close to the boy's femur throughout decomposition only if it had been deeply embedded in his thigh muscle. Although many more colonists died from starvation and disease, some colonists died from wounds received in skirmishes with Native Americans. Had the boy died as a result of such a wound? Ousley's opinion was that the boy wouldn't have died immediately of the wound. It was in a fleshy area around it was in a fleshy area of the leg where a major blood vessel wasn't likely to have been severed. However, infection was common in the colonial Chesapeake region due to lack of medical knowledge about cleanliness and the care of wounds. If the boy's wound had become infected, harmful bacteria would have quickly spread throughout his body, resulting in blood poisoning. A fast acting infection of this sort can kill a person in a matter of days and does not leave traces in the bones. Further analysis of the boy's bones in Owsley's laboratory would supply information about the boy's life and death, though would be solved though whether it would solve this particular puzzle remained to be seen.